So you have come in today to Unlocking Meaningful Feedback, and you are here with myself, Juliette Kuhn. I am the DLC for the Central area, and Wanda is the DLC for the Western area.
Good job.
And Annette, because you support an entire triad, I think you're Northern or Northeastern, but I've forgotten exactly.
Northeastern area.
Okay, see, all right, finally got it. So welcome, and we are going to turn it over to let Wanda start us in an inclusion activity.
Yeah, and welcome. We just had some other people join as well. Juliette said, the bit.ly is at the bottom of the presentation. So go ahead and they'll drop that in the chat room as well. It's really great to start with an inclusion activity to sort of ground us and bring us all together about what we're going to be talking about today. So as you look at this visual, think about which blob person best describes how you feel about feedback in a blended environment. And by blended, we mean, in person and online, or in person and online, or online and in person. We've got all of that. Once you come up with your blob person, you can add your blob person description and how you feel about it in the chat room. And we'll see where everybody is. Hi, Kelly, welcome. We're so glad you're here. We're going to drop the presentation link in the chat room. Right now, Kelly, we are looking at where you fall in this picture on how you feel about feedback in a blended environment. So when you guys find out who you are, where you are, go ahead and describe that in the chat room and let us know. I gotta say, I might be the one like just before the bridge with my hand up going, I don't know if I want to cross that bridge or not. Like, yeah, yeah. You're like, do I go forward? Don't I? The little question, Sarah, you're the person with a question mark over their head contemplating, right?
Not quite. It's the person just to the right of that person who's kind of like just standing there contemplating.
Yeah. Yeah. And Sarah, why don't you, since we were chatting before everybody arrived, why don't you let everybody know what you do? Because you have a very special position.
Okay. I work in an ECS1 classroom at Green Elementary School. So I've got very young children who have a lot of challenges that they're facing. So feedback can be, even just communicating feedback can be challenging.
Right. Yeah, and I think I think we're going to talk about research today, and that'll ground some of the decisions that you can make moving forward.
Very cool. Thank you.
LaTanya, are you anywhere on this bridge, or anybody else anywhere on this bridge?
Oh, here's LaTanya.
She's the question mark.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you
LaTanya,
so much.
would you like to elaborate a little bit on that? Do we still have LaTanya? Maybe she's not able to unmute.
Sorry, I'm sharing the workspace with my kid today, so I was trying to.
Sorry, no worries.
No, it's totally fine. Just some days, just finding the correct words, especially if it's relaying information to parents, making sure that the directions that I provide are simplistic enough that they get what I'm trying to tell them. And then sometimes they're kind of overwhelmed with direct, information coming from different places. So I try to be as concise as I can. Just sometimes how to make that happen leaves me with that question mark.
Yeah. Thank you for elaborating. And Amanda, welcome. Amanda, check out the blob people, we're seeing where we are, and we're going to drop the presentation link for you into the chat room so you can join. And those of you have this. So if you've not used this with your students or your staff or your PLT, feel free to take this inclusion activity and you can change the question and make it open-ended on whatever topic you want. So it's a great inclusion activity to use. Okay, so today we're going to talk about, and hopefully we're going to build your knowledge on the 3 forms of feedback. And those of you who have to leave early, we're recording this and it will be added to our Lunch and Learn page. And then we're going to explore some appropriate platforms for effective feedback. And as you go throughout your year, we have, North Carolina has adopted the North Carolina Digital Learning Standards for students. And as a teacher, you need to look at these standards, and it's great to integrate with the students, because as you integrate these standards in all of your subjects and grade levels to support the students' content learning, you're going to transform your classroom digitally, and you're going to give the students more confidence. So this is something that we want you to be aware of. Welcome, Kyle. We're glad you're here today. We're going to move on here. And so today we're going to talk about the 3 types of feedback. Annette is going to kick off the teacher section on feedback. Juliet is going to talk about peer feedback, and then I'm going to talk about self-reflection.
All right, so we're going to jump right into teacher feedback. And the first thing that we want to stress is the 7 keys to effective feedback. Making sure that it's goal referenced, tangible, and transparent, that students can act on it, and it's very user friendly, like students are able to understand the feedback that you give them. Is it timely? Is it during the learning, so that they can use that feedback to improve? And ongoing and consistent, which sometimes can be very rough in remote or hybrid situation. So if we think about research, you can move on to the next one.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. If we think about research, it has proven that formative assessment that consists of lots of feedback and opportunities to use that feedback will enhance student performance. Feedback is a part of the descriptive evaluation, and it's information that students need to reach a goal. So if you're thinking about the 7 keys, you have your goals that you're trying to reach, and then you're going to use that feedback to focus on the learning outcomes, and you're going to make specific references to either the work, the product, or their performance so that they can improve during the learning. So remember to include those 7 keys when you're giving feedback. One of the articles that we found that we really like is the 7 things to remember about feedback. So Wanda, if you will click on that, and if you have the presentation open, if you will open those 7 keys, 7 things to remember, and just do a quick glance through 1 through 7 and find one that speaks to you, that you're like, yes, that makes sense.
If you're just arriving and you're trying to catch up, I've also put the link to that infographic in the chat, as well as the link to the presentation.
Thank you, Juliet. After you've read through or skimmed through those, what I'd love for you to do is go over to activities in our Google Meet, and I have a poll in activities that you can take. If you will take that poll and tell us which of the 7 things to remember about feedback speaks to you, and then if you want to drop in the chat why it speaks to you and the number, that would be great. So I see we've got some votes coming in now. Two and 3, see, right now 3 has 2 votes. 6 has a vote. Oh, Three seems to be the one that has the most votes right now.
And I'm sharing it so everybody can see. So I'm off the article, but that way everyone can see the poll.
So if we look at 3, which has 5 votes, then we're thinking about the feedback students give teachers can be more powerful than the feedback that teachers give students. And I love that because that speaks to conversations that we have with our students about feedback. So Wanda, if you'll go back over to our presentation, if you'll go to the next slide. The one that I'm going to talk about today is going to be number 5, that effective feedback occurs during the learning while there's still time for them to act on it. So that's going to be my focus during the teacher section. And if we can go to the next one. So when you're thinking about your feedback, we have to actually plan for that feedback, right? We have to, we have to think about, is that feedback going to be written or oral? And I know we do a lot of written, but hopefully we've also found time in remote and hybrid to do oral as well. Is it going to be in a group? Is it going to be individual? Are you going to use a rubric or a conference or a check-in? So we're going to talk about rubrics today, and I'm only going to talk about one type of rubric. So when we think of rubrics, lots of times we think of this large, huge rubric that goes with this big project, but the single point rubric is not that rubric. This rubric can be used anywhere because basically it will describe the criteria for proficiency. So this rubric we have about breakfast in bed was actually taken from Jennifer Gonzalez from The Cult of Pedagogy. And down the middle, you will see the criteria that students have to meet to reach that goal of proficiency. Then to the left is the areas for improvement, and the right is the evidence that you found that they could do to exceed. What are they doing to exceed that? It's a very simple rubric. It doesn't take into account a lot of different standards. Notice that one only has 3. You could have as little or as many as you need for your project or for your learning goal. If you'll go to the next one. And I know sometimes we worry about, well, yes, I still have to give them a score. So here is the single point rubric where we have added in a score. This could be used during the learning, or it could be used at the end for summative, but there are some variations to this rubric that adds in a point score. And at the bottom, you'll see there's a template from Jennifer Gonzalez, and that is for you to be able to use if you want to click on that, Wanda. And you can modify that template as needed. And it gives you just some variations if you need to give rubric scores or even points. And then this next one is a high school example. This is from Pernille Riff, and she created this to use with her students. One of the things that I like about this rubric is that in the beyond expectations, she says evidence of exceeding standards. So making sure you're giving that evidence so that it's actionable and tangible for the students to be able to improve. And the last thing that I want to talk about with the teacher feedback is that making sure we give some type of verbal feedback to our students, or audio, hitting on different modalities so that students can hear what's going on and hear what it is they need to improve on. Sometimes reading it or even just listening to the computer read it, it's really not as effective as hearing your voice. So finding tools like Flipgrid or Screencastify, where you can, or Seesaw, where you can actually verbally speak to them and they can listen and understand the feedback that you're giving to them. So we want to take a little bit of time here just so that you can reflect. And I would love for you to flood the chat with one item that you could take back and use. So thinking through what we've gone over, just this very short rubric that we've talked about, giving verbal feedback, what's one actionable item that you might be able to use in your classroom? Oh, aligns with the EL curriculum. Yes, it does, Carrie. Any other thoughts? Video feedback, yes, to students. Verbal feedback is so powerful. And I know that those times where you could actually give that verbal feedback, small groups, individually, is probably very precious in this digital world. Yes, and that single point rubric has those concrete examples. Oh, I like that. The ritual of a glow and a grow at the end of a session. That's a great idea, Sarah. Thank you guys for giving your feedback. Next, we're going to have Juliet, and she's going to talk about peer feedback.
All right, so moving on to peer feedback, one of the elements in the infographic that Annette shared was this piece from John Hattie about the fact that well, let me just let you read it. So I think we know this as educators, that good, bad, or other, we hear, we see students give each other feedback, and it doesn't mean that it's always correct. So how can we harness that, the fact that they are getting feedback from each other, and help guide it in a way that's going to be more productive? So let's begin with the why. Why do we want students to give feedback to each other? The bullets in this point can really be found in the article that's linked in the top bullet here. This was just a very small scale study of peer and self-reflective feedback, and they had two groups of students doing a physics type series or unit. One group was discussion, the other group did peer and self-reflective feedback. And what they found at the end of that study is the students that were doing the peer and self-reflective feedback actually were able to speak at deeper levels. It empowered them not only to look at their abilities, but also to be able to give critical feedback to their peers and think more deeply about the content. So I would encourage you, it's very brief, and it's also done at higher education levels. So it really speaks to middle and high, but it also, you know, at an elementary level, you definitely can utilize some of the same practices that they did there. So how can we make sure that the peer feedback that students are giving each other is really the type of feedback that is going to do all the things in the previous slide, empower them, make them critical thinkers, and help them to think deeper about the content? Well, first, before we give them the opportunities to give each other feedback, you want to make sure that they have exemplars. Additionally, you have to give them some focus as well as the how-to, which is going to be the protocol. So let's start with the exemplars. When you are expecting students to give feedback to one another in any form, they really need to see what is good work. What does that math thinking look like? So that may be in a video format. It may be two students modeling it. Whatever the format is, they need to see what the top tier work is going to look like. And maybe that's a paper that previous students have done or someone in your class. So make sure that they have that to refer to when they're providing that feedback. Additionally, we want to talk about making sure that they have a focus. So in talking to students about their best experiences and their worst experiences, the worst experiences are always turn and trade papers with your elbow partner and give them feedback on their paper. That is not necessarily going to go well if they don't know one another and they don't know what they're supposed to be looking for. So Annette talked about the single point rubric earlier in the presentation, you might use something as small as this. I did shrink it down, but maybe as an example, looking at the breakfast in bed example, you could maybe give them 3 points. But starting off, you may also want to break that into smaller focus points so that they know this is the piece, just this piece that they're looking for right now. That can make it a lot easier as they build up to doing larger amounts of peer review. So start small, start with a focus, and then build upon that. Finally, we get to how. How are students going to be modeling or giving feedback? So we want to make sure we establish protocols, which are really established well in EL. Somebody brought up the single point rubric and some of those things being part of. Are there things coming through, or does somebody have their mic on? I hear a bunch of things. So with the protocols, that's going to be how we instruct our students on how to give feedback to each other. So moving along in the protocols, we want to make sure we establish trust. Now we talk about establishing trust between our students and ourselves, but we need to also look at how we establish trust between them. Another more feedback that I got from students about their experiences with feedback was that when they gave their work to a friend, they really took what that friend said to heart, and they could internalize the critical feedback as well as the positive feedback because they had trust in that friend. So John Spencer has this paper, Why Trust is Vital to Peer Feedback. He's got part of his podcast, a video. You might want to check that out. But I really appreciate this graphic that he includes. And you probably have had experiences in all 4 quadrants. So you have that maybe colleague or that neighbor who you don't know well, so you haven't really established trust. And they give you compliments all the time. And so you kind of start wondering like, oh, that's flattery, but I don't know that I really believe that because they don't really know me. We don't have a relationship. Contrary to that is if they give you critical feedback, you might feel, instead of internalizing it and thinking about how you could improve, you might actually develop kind of a hatred for that person. That's going to be the same with our students. Wanda, can you go back one more, please? And affirmation, when you get feedback that's positive from somebody you trust, that's very affirming that, hey, I did think I was on the right track, and that just affirmed what I was already thinking. Critical feedback, even from a trusted person, can sometimes be hard to hear, but when you know that that person has your best interest at heart, it's much easier to be reflective and think, maybe Annette really has a point about what I did there, and I can handle that a lot better because I know she has the best interest of me, of our team, and of our students. All right, now I'm ready. So that goes to building that trust. How can we build that trust within our students? This particular article, anytime you see an arrow like that, it means it's linked to something. And Rachel Wagner did a small scale study with her higher education students in which she didn't just say turn and hand your paper, but she rather had them keep their peer reviewers for a longer period of time. What she found during that time is they built trust with each other, so their peer feedback was actually deeper and it really was more beneficial. But not only that, she found that they often went back to each other even when they weren't prompted to get additional feedback. I know and probably many of you have had that experience within a really tight team. You know who you trust and who you want to go to for feedback because you know they'll be honest, but they have the best interest of what you're doing at heart. So that is really the foundation of providing that feedback. So that, coupled with protocols such as, oh, that's right, I'm sorry, I forgot. So this was going to be a pause moment for you to think about, how do you build feedback between your students within your classroom community? So we're going to give you about a minute to put some things in the chat that you know that you've seen really work well and share those out with all of us. right, so Sarah is talking about one glow and a grow, and we're going to revisit that, Sarah. So thank you for putting that in there. We didn't even pay Sarah for that. Oh, yes. Wanda's talking about the time that students get to talk to each other and build trust. And that can be a challenge right now when we are socially distanced in our classes and at lunch. So that may take a little more creativity to build into our blended learning environments, definitely. I know when I walk into a class, I can tell if that community has really worked on the trust factor because there's a buzz in that classroom and you can hear the same types of starting to the beginnings of sentence, whether they disagree or agree or want to add on. So I know that that level of trust is within certain communities just by listening to the kids talk to one another during a work time. Any other thoughts? Oh, yes. Sarah, good point. Yes. Asking a friend for help first. Ask 3 before me. Sarah, I know you only have 3, but in normal circumstances, then they have to go to their peers first. You're not just the sage on the stage. So that's a very good point about building trust with the interactions between the students. And that really brings us to how do we start to build that trust and those protocols so that it becomes part of our classroom culture, not just a framework where we're trying to force something between our students. So the first thing in establishing protocols and trust is going to be that the teacher is modeling these protocols with validity, with consistency. So when you have a protocol that you want students to use between each other, make sure that you're doing that as well. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. The next part, of course, would be the group review. So those morning meetings, the inclusion activities, that's a really significant time for students to practice those protocols in a group environment where they can try it out and hear other students use it. And finally, when they do practice it, getting that feedback from you on their feedback will help guide them in the right directions. The video that is showing here, the group review, anytime you do a search for peer feedback, you're probably going to find this video called Austin's Butterfly. And it's just an illustration of different groups of students giving feedback to a series of pictures done by, I think it's a kindergartner or a first grade student, and how that helped that student evolve their drawing over time through peer feedback. So along those lines with the protocols, I actually included one very similar to what Sarah does. This is 2 glows and a grow. And this teacher does exactly, in just a moment, Wanda's going to play the teacher's glow, the teacher's grow, and then you'll get to hear how a student implemented that. So at the beginning of the year, the teacher really works that in. On her seesaw comments, she models it every time. So when the students are getting their feedback from the teacher,
Annabelle, I loved how you explained your thinking while you were working.
so you can hear she gave the glow, and then
Annabelle, could you tell us what strategies you were using?
she gives the grow, and then in their morning meetings, they continue to practice that. And it isn't really till about January, these are first graders, where she turns on the ability for students to comment on each other's on Seesaw. And then you start to hear a deeper level of glows and grows, or grows and glows. So this is a glow from a student, a grow.
Next time you can explain your thinking.
So that was so when the students do it, they typically record a glow, their 2 glows first, and then they'll do a separate comment with their grow. And when you walk into that classroom, you can hear that going on any time of the day. And they actually practice with sentence stems as well in like seminar formats. A couple other feedback formats that you can use would include the be specific, or be kind, be specific, be helpful. Again, that article is linked to a blog that gives specific examples that this teacher uses. And there are a number of ways that people kind of flesh this out with their students. So this particular teacher to the right fleshes that out with what does that look like? So you can have those standards and that protocol, but just reminders of what that looks like. Another format called tag actually includes some sentence starters. So you're going to tell something you liked, very similar to two glows in a grow, ask a thoughtful question, and then give a positive suggestion. So that aligns really well with Annette's single point rubric. They're giving concrete suggestions or examples or evidence. And then the next slide, you will see that arrow again. And these are a variety of sentence stems that can be used. You could just pluck a few out for your elementary, but they're used at middle and high school within a seminar format or in any other format that they could give feedback. So if you click on this, you will get a PDF with all of these sentence starters. I used to keep them actually laminated in my classroom. Now, take a breath. It's been a lot to kind of digest. And we have a strategy, an SOS strategy here from Discovery Education. Maybe some of you have done it with your students. AEIOU, you do not have to do all of them, but I'd like to point out at the bottom of this slide, we did provide you with a folder with digital versions of a lot of the Discovery Education strategies. So feel free to utilize those with your students in your blended environment. Right now, what we'd like you to do is choose A, an adjective, or E, an emotion, or I, something interesting, or oh, wow, that's surprising, or something that made you think. If you will just add that into the chat, just one of those is fine. Inspired. That's a great emotion, Paul. Excited to try out the video screencasting reflection. Oh, something hadn't thought about. The ask aspect of the tag method. Yes, Sarah, I found that very interesting too when I saw that tag method, to ask a question. That of course goes into that deeper thinking about the content and being critical thinkers. I will say for me, if I were typing in the chat, I found it very interesting, the article about keeping the same peer reviewers for a period of time, helping to build that trust element, because that's such an important element and can be challenging right now in these times. So I've found that very interesting.
Yeah, trust is very important to build in the classroom. And as we stated earlier, it's really hard to, we've had to work harder at it to build the trust in the breakout rooms and being in our virtual environment. And as we return to the classroom next week, one of the things that we're gonna talk about now is the student reflection aspect of how students give themselves feedback. And reflection is not something that comes naturally. And as we circle back to Hattie, you know, we know that habits occur over time, and small changes or habits, they introduce routines. And as a teacher, if you introduce the routine of self-reflection and you model, just as Juliet said earlier, we have to model how to peer reflect. We also have to model how to student reflect. And again, as we talked about Hattie, you know, self-reported grades or self-reflections, you know, when my kids would come home, I would say, well, how did you do on the test? Well, I don't know. I don't have the grade back yet. Well, how do you think you did on the test? That question of how do you think you did on the test, that's where Hattie is talking about. It's like a 1.17. And it really helps kids really grow and come out of their box. And in the speaker notes of this slide deck, we do have a video where Hattie explains about visible learning, and he would actually rename this strategy student expectations, because as teachers, if we have high expectations for students and we model that to them, oftentimes when students reflect on what they're doing, they're going to exceed their expectations. And then of course, students gain confidence when they feel good about themselves. And so modeling to students how to self-reflect is very important. One of our initiatives in Wake County are student portfolios. And in student portfolios, they have to reflect. And so for the last, 2-3 years, we've had teams in the schools that have gone over the portfolios and have gotten, every student a portfolio. So this is a great opportunity for students to add to their portfolios and just help them reach their full potential in using their portfolios. So we don't want to forget about the portfolios. We've also added some reflection sentence stems down below. But again, modeling to students how to self-reflect, it happens over time. And in my career in 4th grade, I would always start the year, and it was a continuous, how do we self-reflect? And I would self-reflect in front of the students, and then they would learn to self-reflect in what they do. And of course, back in the day, we had paper portfolios, and now we've got digital portfolios. Go figure. And here's an example of a math portfolio. So I know we've had a lot on our plates, and we may or may not have contributed to portfolios, but portfolios are a great way for feedback for students and helps them grow as they move forward. Okay. And we have put together just sort of a feedback of digital tools. We've got some examples. We've talked about screencasting to give video feedback, and screencasting can also do voice feedback. We really haven't talked about Flipgrid, but we've done a lot of presentations on Lunch and Learn, and we've talked about Flipgrid a lot. And Flipgrid is great because you can have just a one-on-one Flipgrid with a student and have it private. You could have the whole class. If you're really wanting to grow a student, and Sarah, this might be great for your kids because you could have one for each of your kids, and they might really enjoy seeing you and listening to you. And so that might be options. But go and check out these examples that we've given. Obviously, our littles really love Seesaw. We've connected the tools for all learners here as well. And you'll be able to use all of these examples and just, make them applicable to yourself and in your classroom and your needs. All right. Well, we're going to pause right here. We have covered a lot. We've given you a lot of research. We've gone into the research aspect of it because it's important as educators when we self-reflect on our own pedagogy that we have that research behind it. And so if you've not heard of Hattie or any of the articles, the Wagner articles that Juliet has given us and that Annette has given us, go ahead and do a little bit of research, because that way you'll feel comfortable as an educator as you implement these strategies in your classroom. You know that they're research-based strategies in your classroom. Annette, Juliet, anything else?
I just wanted to point out that I put a lot of the links, they're in the slide deck. As we were going along, the links were dropped into the chat. I'm one of those people during these virtual conferences, I like to keep clicking them, and then I have a window full of tabs. So if you're one of those people, you can do that. The slide that Wanda was just on, slide 41, can you back up one more time? We really value the feedback that we get to develop our future sessions. So please, if you will click on that link, and if you had any colleagues that had to leave early, if you'll make sure that they also provide feedback from this session, we greatly, greatly appreciate it. We really do. Again,
Yeah, even if they watch it virtually or record it afterwards.
Yes. We, again, valuing the feedback. Like Wanda said, the next slide down, we have added additional resources that we may not have talked about during the session. Please, like she mentioned, go and take a peek at those. They add on to this information. And many of you are probably already familiar with the DLC website because that's how you got here. If you have not listened to any of the podcasts, they are amazing. We have heard rave reviews from a lot of people around the county. You can pick the ones that meet your needs, or just listen on your drive to work or your drive on the weekend if you're going somewhere. And then, of course, our newsletter for February just came out. We try to keep it timely with up-to-date information about the most recent changes, or things that have come about since things are changing so very quickly. And then we have some upcoming lunch and learns about building relationships, which we talked about a little bit today. So that's a great add-on after this one, and engaging students with podcasting. So those are going to be two very engaging lunch and learns that we would encourage you to come back and check out. And
Absolutely.
finally, oh, sorry, Wanda.
No, I was just gonna say, absolutely. I was gonna say, and don't forget, we're recording this, so you'll get to listen to our lovely voices again if you'd like. And then you can pause us when you want.
And you can encourage anyone that couldn't come today to go back. And we noticed that the recordings are getting a lot of activity just because people are doing things during the day. So if you saw something that might speak to a colleague, a teammate, definitely refer them to the Digital Learning Coordinator site and the Lunch and Learn page, where you can find all of our previously recorded lunch and learns. And if you don't know who your DLC is, or you have a friend who doesn't know, you can find that as well right there, and just reach out to the DLC in your area and they will be happy to help.